That was great. So now I'm following Hamid Bey. Great. So when I was in college, I loved philosophy class. Actually, I got better grades in philosophy than I did in my major. Funny. So that helped keep my GPA up so I could graduate. But so in philosophy, so now fast forward 2-3 years, and I'm kind of getting full of myself, getting A's on all my papers and everything. So the teacher says, well, you can write a paper on anything you want. So I said, I'm going to write a paper on the existence of God. I'm going to prove that God exists.
Wow.
And I bombed. She felt sorry for me, so she gave me a C-.
Wow.
So anyway, I've learned I'm not going there tonight. So just we're going to assume that now, all right? So I wanted to talk about monotheism. So this is basically the belief in an all-powerful God, a universal being, a divine consciousness, something like that. And, but I stuck the word practical in front of it because it applies to our daily lives. How do we apply this to our daily lives? How many people feel totally one with everything that is around them? How many people feel one with that guy that cut them off on the way over here, or the person driving 30 miles an hour because it was raining? And no offense if that was you. So we, in our daily lives, practically, in our minds, we could say, well, yeah, we all believe in one God, whatever that may be, the Father, Mother God, the Spirit. But how many people really believe it in here, where you can practice it, where you can look at somebody and say, that they're divine. So, in our world that we're living, we live in a dualistic world, so in this dualistic world, everything is judged. We're trained to judge everything. Everything that's good is God, right? And everything that's bad is Lucifer, is the devil, right? Or is negative. And so we always associate these two things, right? We say, I like this. I like this. I like the rain. I like the cold weather. I like the warm weather. But that's dualism. That's not monotheism. We're living in a dualistic society. We're living in a dualistic world. So if you think about it, all of the scriptures and the writings tell us that, whatever this thing is called God, assuming that this God exists, he, she existed before time was created, and he, she will exist after time ends, right? So therefore, God would have to exist outside of time. So now if you're outside of time, then there is no good or bad, right? Think about when you're meditating and you go into that beautiful, peaceful place where, in the shaman world, we might call it stepping out of time. When you're in that place, there is no good, there is no bad, there just merely is. So this is what I would call monotheism. So this, and the practical application of this is applying this in our lives so that we could see every human being as divine. Okay, so it often comes up, and this is always a great controversial thing to get people really going here, is, so if this is true, we have a good and a bad, which we experience, but then there's a higher good. And this higher good is beyond the judgment of good and bad. So oftentimes people ask the question, well, how could God allow this person to die? Or how could God allow, the heinous crimes of Adolf Hitler to kill those people and torture those people and starve them to death and all that? How could a loving God do that, right? But if you step out of time, there's not a judgment there. There's not a judgment of good or bad. There's merely divine sparks that are on the journey learning, like riding a bike almost. You ride the bike, you fall off the bike, what do? You get up, you dust yourself off, you hop back on the bike and you try it again. And then this time you fall the other way and skin the other knee, right? And you get up and you do it again. No judgment, you just do it again. You keep on doing it. If you're learning math, working on problems, you just keep on working at them until you get them done. So I would propose that there are no bad people, there are just good people that are a little bit confused. So let's say the Bible would call that sin, right? So those things would be called sins, right? I was, raised Catholic, and they said, well, if you do something bad, that's a sin, and you get like an El Marco marked on your soul, and that marks your soul. So, but God gives us free will so that we can do what we want. And these things that we call good or evil are a function of our own, man-made society. When you think about it, just about every law that you could think about that you can do today, or, in some society somewhere, it was allowed, or in one society, another society, it's not allowed. Look at, they just legalized marijuana, right? A year ago it was illegal, now you can. So is that right or wrong? Who knows? But this is all judgments of what of what we're applying to the world. So to truly apply monotheism in our lives, it would help us to let go of that judgment. To not say, oh, that person is bad. Can you believe what they did? Can you believe what they did? But to say, I see the divine spark in that person, and I see that. So sin is an old archer term, as we've probably heard this before, that means to miss the mark. So I believe that if we apply this in our lives, sin means to perceive ourselves as separate from God. If you distilled it down to its core root, it's to perceive oneself as separate from God, or to perceive another as separate from God. So there was a spiritual healer, Phineas Quimby. Has anybody heard of Phineas Quimby? Yeah, okay, right. So Phineas Quimby was a healer around the 1800s, and some of his students were Barry Baker Eddy, who started the Christian Science, I believe, and wasn't the person who started Unity, wasn't that a student also? I forget, who was the name? Fillmore, okay, thank you. And so these were students, so you can see that this guy was pretty powerful, but he never wrote anything down. He didn't do it. But the really interesting thing is the way he looked at the world and the way he looked at illness was he called it an error thought. An error thought. Now think about that. If you look at this as saying, this is not a bad person, there's just people that have error thoughts. So look at it this way. From that point when we leave the spiritual realm and come into the world of dualism, which some might call conception or whatever, we're very, very susceptible to the things around us. We're like a sponge. We're absorbing everything we see. Well, then maybe something comes along. Maybe we get some abuse as a child, and we're still a sponge. So we develop thoughts about these things, and these error thoughts are created to protect us. So we're saying, I think like a common one might say, if I'm a woman and I was abused, I might gain a lot of weight because this error thought says that if I gain weight, men will not find me attractive and I will not be abused again. So this is the mind trying to protect itself. It's not a bad thing, it's just an error thought. It's just perceiving ourselves as separate from God. So there's us now, and there's the other thing. So this error thought forms within us. Everybody says thoughts are things. What does that really mean? So this error thought creates inside of us, but our body says, wait a minute, this is a foreign thing. This is preventing me from feeling my divinity, from feeling my oneness. So what happens is the body forms a cocoon around that error thought to protect itself from it. Just like if you get a sliver, your body forms a callus around it so that it doesn't infect your body. Same kind of thing with an error thought, that the body forms this cocoon around it. And what's the cocoon made of? The cocoon is made of what you were experiencing at the time of that trauma. So, in other words, say you were bad and your parents locked you in the bathroom for 12 hours with no food or anything and said, we're never going to let you out because you were so bad. And the bathroom was painted blue. Well, yeah. So that cocoon is now painted, the cocoon is blue. So every time you see blue, you feel claustrophobic and you feel like you've done something wrong. You feel guilty and you don't even know why. But you blame that on the blue. But actually, the real cause of that feeling is the error thought that's underneath it, which we won't allow ourselves to go to because our psyche is trying to protect us from it. So as we grow, we develop what's called like a critical mind. So that comes around maybe 13 or 14, right? Whoever had kids, or who was it? We were all kids, right? What happens when you get 13 or 14? You know everything, right? And nobody's going to tell you what's right or what's wrong. And so that is when the critical mind develops, and we stop being a sponge like that. So we've had all these thoughts that we've absorbed, all these error thoughts that are formed, and they form all this, like there's these little blocks inside of us all over the place. And some, everybody has different thoughts and different things, but we all have them. It's the human condition. We all have them. And so each one of these thoughts effectively forms a life of its own. It's like we created something inside of us, and it's alive, and it's in there, but it's protected, so it only comes up every now and then when something reminds you of it. So each one of these things in there is now a separate part of us. So, there was a story I was reading about a young woman was engaged in activities with her young boyfriend when she was 15 or something, and the father caught him, and so he beat the daughter terribly. And so what does she do? She becomes very promiscuous because she says, I'm going to get back at him for doing that to me. And then what happens, and this is actually a real life case, what happens is then she is not ever fulfilled sexually because anything around that is related to her getting punished and beat, and she forms this error thought that says, I'm going to get back at my father and I'm going to go and have sex with everybody I can. But it is never rewarding anymore for that person because there's always that. So there's an error thought that causes it to happen. But then she also went to maybe the Catholic school and they said, that's bad, you shouldn't do that. So now she's got another thought saying, I'm guilty. I feel guilty for doing this. But the other part, and she doesn't even know what's going on, is saying, do this, but don't do that. And so you see how all these different conflicting thoughts will cause us to not perceive the unity of the world, because we see the cocoon around that thought, and we say it's out there, rather than being right in here where the unity really is. So with that, I'd love to read. This is something that was written by Joe Vitale. Everybody know Joe. He was in What the Belief Do We Know and all kind of stuff. And it's called, if I can say this right, Ho'oponopono. I got it. Okay, it says Miracle Healing from Hawaii by Joe Vitale. So this is something that Joe wrote, and I'd love to read it because I think it is just so relevant to this, and it's just mind-blowing. 2 years ago, I heard about a therapist in Hawaii who cured a complete ward of criminally insane patients without ever even seeing them. The psychologist would study an inmate's chart and then look within himself to see how he created that person's illness. As he improved himself, the patients improved. When I first heard this story, I thought it was an urban legend. How could anyone heal anyone else by healing himself? How could even the best self-improvement master cure the criminally insane? It didn't make any sense, it wasn't logical, so I dismissed the story. However, I heard it again a year later. I heard that the therapist had used a Hawaiian healing process called Ho'oponopono. I I had never heard of it, yet I couldn't let it leave my mind. If the story was at all true, I had to know more. I had always understood total responsibility to mean that I am responsible for what I think and do. Beyond that, it's out of my hands. I think that most people think of total responsibility that way. We're responsible for what we do, not what anyone else does, but that's wrong. The Hawaiian therapist who healed those mentally ill people would teach me an advanced new perspective about total responsibility. His name is Dr. Hugh Len. We probably spent an hour talking on our first phone call. I asked him to tell me the complete story of his work as a therapist. He explained that he worked at a Hawaii State Hospital for 4 years. That ward where they kept the criminally insane was dangerous. So psychologists would quit on a monthly basis. The staff called in sick a lot or simply quit. People would walk through that ward with their backs against the wall, afraid of being attacked by the patients. It was not a pleasant place to live, work, or visit. Dr. Len told me that he never saw the patients. He agreed to have an office and to review their files. While he looked at those files, he would work on himself. As he worked on himself, the patients began to heal. After a few months, patients that had to be shackled were being allowed to walk freely, he told me. Others who had to be heavily medicated were getting off their medications. And those who had no chance of ever being released were being freed. I was in awe. Not only that, he went on, but the staff began to enjoy coming to work. And that's kind of interesting because I know my brother-in-law used to work as a psychologist in a prison, and he hated it. He said the guards and stuff were just as much a prisoner as the people in the prison. Absenteeism and turnover disappeared. We ended up with more staff than we needed because patients were being released and all the staff was showing up to work. Today, that ward is closed. This is where I had to ask the million-dollar question. What were you doing within yourself that caused those people to change? I was simply healing the part of me that created them, he said. I didn't understand. Dr. Len explained that total responsibility for your life means that everything in your life, simply because it is in your life, is your responsibility. In a literal sense, the entire world is your creation. Whew, that is tough to swallow. Being responsible for what I say or do is one thing, but being responsible for everything in my life that everyone says or does is quite another. Yet the truth is this: if you take complete responsibility for your life, then everything you see, hear, taste, and touch, or in any way experience is your responsibility because it is your life. This means that terrorist activity, the president, the economy, or anything you experience and don't like is up for you to heal. They don't exist, in a manner of speaking, except as projections from inside you. The problem isn't with them, it's with you. And to change them, you have to change you. How about that? I know this is tough to grasp, let alone accept or actually live. Blame is far easier than total responsibility. But as I spoke with Dr. Len, I began to realize that healing for him and in Ho'oponopono means loving yourself. How about that? If you want to improve your life, you have to heal your life. If you want to cure anyone, even the mentally ill criminal, you do it by healing you. I asked Dr. Len how he went about healing himself, what he was doing exactly when he looked at those patient files. I just kept saying, I'm sorry. I love you, over and over again, he explained. That's it? That's it. Turns out that loving yourself is the greatest way to improve yourself. And as you improve yourself, you improve your world. Let me give you a quick example of how this works. One day, someone sent me an email that upset me. In the past, I would have handled it by working on my emotional hot buttons or by trying to reason with the person who sent me the nasty message. This time, I decided to try Dr. Len's method. I kept silently saying, I'm sorry, I love you. I didn't say to anyone in particular. I was simply evoking the spirit of love to heal within me what was creating the outer circumstance. Within an hour, I got an email from the same person. He apologized for his previous message. Keep in mind that I didn't take any outward action to get at that apology. I didn't even write him back. Yet by saying, I love you, I somehow healed within me that which was creating him. I later attended a Ho'oponopono workshop run by Dr. Len. He's now 70-year-old, considered a grandfatherly shaman and somewhat reclusive. He praised my book, The Attractor Factor, that's Joe Vitale's book. He told me that as I improve myself, my book's vibration will raise, and everyone will feel it when they read it. In short, as I improve, my readers will improve. What about the books that are already sold out there, I asked. They aren't out there, he explained, once again blowing my mind with his mystic wisdom. They are still in you. In short, there is no out there. It would take a whole book to explain this advanced technique within the depth it deserves. Suffice it to say that whenever you want to improve anything in your life, there's only one place to look, inside you. When you look, do it with love. Joe Vitale. Pretty interesting stuff, huh?
Yeah.
So we all know yeah, go ahead.
Are you taking questions, Steve?
Sure.
Since you read that, and in the past when we had the circle here with the Kapono, there were two other sentences that were added to that you said from that writing was, I'm sorry, I love you. So the please forgive me and thank you is not part of it? He had worked in the psychiatric facility with just the two phrases and created that dramatic change.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first I heard the story from that.
Yeah, well, and I feel the other thing is that it's not the words so much as what you're feeling, right? So you could say anything you want. The words aren't magic. I feel it's the feeling that really makes the difference. The feeling of that. Yeah.
Can you help me to understand what you said as far as if I say, I'm sorry, I love you, Trump, then he will get better?
Well, let's try it. Right? Why don't we all close our eyes and just
We're
pick?
not saying, I'm sorry, Trump.
No.
We're talking about ourselves.
You're not saying you love Trump. You're saying you love yourself.
Oh, okay.
Because what he's saying is that that your perception of Trump is a projection from inside of you, something that you're not loving yourself about. And it's interesting, they did say the president, even though this was probably written 20 years ago, I'm sure everybody always has things with the president, right, of course. But, so he's saying, love yourself, that what you are seeing in the world is a projection of what's inside of you, okay? So why don't we all pick someone or something or some situation in our life, let's just close our eyes and just think about it in a moment. You might even feel yourself getting riled up, the heartbeat increasing a little bit, like, and just say these words, I'm sorry, I love you, to yourself. And love yourself and feel that love flowing through your body. Feel that peace, that letting go, flowing through your body. And just take a moment to do that. And then just come back, open your eyes when you're ready. How'd that work? How'd that feel? Yeah. You know, again, it's one of those cliche things we've probably all already heard, but anger is like drinking a glass of poison and waiting for the other person to die, you know? You know, so. Okay, so this is all very interesting, and I wanted to touch on one other aspect. So this is, you know, an aspect of practical oneness with the universe is to look at this and to realize, to see that divinity in each of us. But there's another person. His name is Ralph Ellison. He's a contemporary psychiatrist or psychologist. Does anybody know of him or ever hear of him? So you've heard of him? Okay. Yeah, so he worked on multiple personality disorders and things like that, but he found out some very interesting things which I'd like to share with you. He discovered what he calls the inner self helper, right? And so he describes this as an ego state. It's a part of our inner self, and these are the characteristics that he describes of this inner self helper. There is no date of origin. We're born with this inner self-helper. The inner self-helper is not there to handle unexpressed anger or the feelings from any trauma. This inner self-helper does not have the capacity for hate. It feels only love and goodwill. The inner self-helper serves as a conduit for God's healing power and love. It never expresses a need for a separate life. And this would be in opposition to what I was talking about, like when we form those other error thoughts. You know, the error thoughts, they want to live. They're like, I don't want it. Nobody's going to get rid of me. I want to live, right? Whereas the inner self-helper it doesn't need that separate life. Rather, it wants to become one with everyone and everything and make our bodies whole as one. It has no concept of gender. It knows the condition of multiplicity that this exists within, but it understands our entire history and our entire self, and it knows how we can heal ourselves. It knows how we can become one. Other than love and goodwill, it seems to be pure intellect. In other words, it's very, very smart, but it doesn't express other emotions other than love and goodwill. It knows how to solve all of our problems. The inner self-helper is usually not known by the other aspects of ourselves. So these other error thoughts that we form don't even know that this exists. And many of us don't even know that we have it, that it exists. It's always there, and it's always willing to help if you call upon it. The inner self-helper may be the one, he says, that creates these cocoons around the error thoughts and things like that. These individual, I guess he calls them ego states, if you will. You know, so it could be just a simple error thought that says, oh, I feel stupid about myself, all the way up to an extreme where you develop a different personality, where you have an experience or trauma that's so traumatic that the inner self-helper, to protect you, creates this. He says that it creates this alternate personality that is different with the situation. So he concludes, only when all the personalities subordinate themselves to the direction and authority of the inner self-helper can order come out of chaos and healing proceed. Only when all the personalities subordinate themselves to the direction and authority of the inner self-helper can order come out of chaos and healing proceed. Now, this is a psychological term, but what is this in our spiritual world? This is the still small voice within that we come to when we meditate. It has all these traits, and now psychologists are identifying it, and they have a term for it now. So pretty soon we won't be able to use that term anymore because it'll be considered malpractice, right? Because I don't have a degree. But But it's just fascinating when you think about it that we actually apply this. And I mean, how many people really think about that when you meditate and go within, that there's an aspect of you that's there to help you, that you ask to help. So he also found something that is really fascinating. And I'll quote, "In the same physical body, an adult ego state who smokes, wears glasses, is right-handed, good at math, allergic to sulfur, with a normal IQ, can exist alongside a child ego state who has never smoked, has 20/20 vision, is left-handed, paints, has no allergies, and scores in 130s on the same IQ test." So this is the same body with multiple personality disorder. One personality comes in and they're allergic to things, what he said, they smoke, they're addicted to cigarettes, they wear glasses, they're right-handed, they have poor eyesight, they're good at math, they're alert, they have allergies. And then the other personality comes in, they've never smoked, they have no desire to have a cigarette. I mean, how many of us have ever tried to quit smoking? I quit twice, right? And it's very difficult. They're left-handed. I've even heard cases where people's foot sizes will change. Their physical characteristics of their body will change like that. By the mind, changing things that quickly when the other personality steps in. And this is all documented stuff by psychiatrists. And so what is this saying? This is saying that we can change our lives, we can change our bodies, we can heal ourselves like that. We hear this, but how do we apply it in our lives? And I believe we apply it in our lives by learning to love ourselves and learning to come within ourselves. So we really have everything we need to find that perfection in ourselves right now. We have everything we need right here within ourselves. But we have to stop looking out there for our answers. We have to stop blaming other people for everything. We have to say, hey, I take responsibility. Listen to what Dr. Hugh Lenz said. Take responsibility for all that you see and all that you do, because that's a projection of yourself. And so loving yourself is the key to realizing your divinity. Loving yourself is the key to realizing your divinity. And we are all divine. Thank you.